with performative stuff?
Anything?
Because you just said you have a problem with performative, and yet you vote for Donald Trump, the guy who looks like a clown every day, who puts on makeup. Don't tell me you don't like performative.
In regard to the Epstein files, what is your opinion? I'd like Leonard's opinion too, as to why when Biden was in office, for 4 years, they didn't release them then, or at least tried to.
Sure. So it's very simple for me. And by the way, I've answered that question on this show, and I'm very consistent. I've been wanting the files to be released for many, many years. I believe there are prominent people on the left and there are prominent people on the right. Now, there's no evidence to show that Joe Biden was in the Epstein files, but there's certainly plenty of evidence showing that Trump is in there. But what I try to focus on now, because Joe Biden is not the president, Barack Obama is not the president, there's a guy by the name of Donald Trump who's the president of the United States, who right now could release the files. MAGA people all over this country have been saying for years, release the files, release the files. Well, their own guy who they voted for, I would assume that you are one of them, is making every excuse in the book, not only not to release the files, but he doesn't want people like you talking about it. So how do you feel about that? That should be the question. I've answered that question time and time again. I think Biden should have released the files. I think anybody.
But I know that you think you should have.
I've answered that. I've said it before, and I'll say it again.
Okay.
But it was, if I may say, David, it was being investigated. Sure. Remember, they started the trial for Epstein Maxwell in 2018, and she went to prison in about 2021, 2022. Okay, so that was the major part of the investigation. And also they arrested Epstein, and in 2019, he was it suicide or I don't know what it was.
Well, here's what I'll
add.
You
have to remember they were progressing on the investigation.
But here's what I'll add to David, to what he's asking me here. I'll tell you one thing Joe Biden didn't do. He didn't call any of his supporters. Hold on.
Yeah.
Please, this is important. First of all, he didn't have one of his personal attorneys interview Maxwell. And then after Maxwell said some nice things about Donald Trump, or, sending her to a Club Med facility, he didn't put her on work release. One thing Joe Biden didn't do is he didn't attack all of his supporters and call them stupid. Maybe even people like
he also didn't release the files.
Okay, but I'm trying to, again, why can't you just admit that Donald Trump is dodging this? Because he's most likely in the files.
I
but
do admit
instead you want to call up and you want to talk about Joe Biden. You supported Donald Trump.
Every time they're in a corner, it's Joe Biden, it's Hunter
Biden. No. I'll explain.
It's Hillary Clinton.
It's not.
Go ahead,
Dave.
It's not.
Okay, thank you. It's not so much Biden, because you're right. I don't want to just make it about him because he's not in office. My real point with this question was the Democrats now who are saying they want to release it. I don't buy it for a second, because they could have done that when Biden was in office, and they wouldn't have had anyone blocking them.
They voted for it.
A ton of people on both.
Every single Democrat voted to release the files. The only people that don't want the files to be released right now are Republicans.
You can't say I don't think they wanted them released when they're voting to release them.
They want them to be released now.
They never released them during.
But they're voting for it now, Dave. They're voting for it now.
And the resolution is for everything to be released.
They had every opportunity then to do it, and they had the White House backing them, but they didn't do it. They only waited until they didn't have the power.
Dave, they're doing it now. Why are Republicans?
When they know they don't have the power.
Did they vote against it? Did the Democrats vote against it when Biden was president? Did they vote against it? Was there a vote in the House?
No, they voted for it, but it didn't go anywhere because they know that it's...
Democrats voted for it. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question now. Why is it that, and we're talking now in 2025, why is it that, Dave, wait for the question.
Sure.
Why is it that every single Democrat wants the files to be released, no matter who's in the files? They want the files to be released. Why is it that every single Republican on this committee voted against releasing the files? Can you give me one valid explanation?
Sure, because it's either, people who, like, it's either them or some of their friends, all their political friends are in it. There's a ton of people that are in this. And here's my point.
Donald Trump in it?
He's probably in it. I don't know to what extent he's in it. We can speculate.
Do you still support Donald Trump?
I support some of the policies, sure.
Okay, but you voted for him. Do you think you made a good vote?
Correct. I do, yes.
You do. So
because he's already done things that I like doing, and I haven't.
Because he's done a few things that you might like, you have no problem supporting a possible pedophile. Is that what you're saying?
Well, unless I can see actual hardcore significant evidence.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Okay, let's go. But David, let's talk about this hardcore evidence. First of all, here's what we know for sure. Donald Trump was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein for 10 years. We also know he was on the Maxwell flight log at least 7 times. We also know that he wants everybody to stop talking about this. He's even called his supporters stupid. We also know that he sent his personal attorney to have a meeting with Maxwell, not because they wanted the truth, so that Maxwell could say some nice things about Donald Trump, because we know days after she was sent to a Club Med facility and she's on work release. We also know Donald Trump self-admitted himself that there was a young girl that was working at Mar-a-Lago. Epstein took that young girl from him, and that's why they stopped talking. Donald Trump also admitted on audio that Epstein liked some really young girls. He's also seen on video bragging and joking to Epstein, looking at women. We also know that Donald Trump is the guy who bragged sexually.
Well, what does
we
that
also
even
know
prove?
that Donald. We also know that Donald Trump. We also know that doesn't prove anything. So
bragging,
they scrubbed the files.
Women and joking, and that's your evidence that he's a pedophile.
A best friend. Hold on a second. Did you not listen to the other things that I mentioned? By the way, Donald Trump is the guy that bragged about going into teenage girls' locker rooms, looking at them half naked sexually without permission. Donald Trump.
On the Howard
hold on a
Stern
second.
show.
I don't care what show it was on. Doesn't matter what show it was on.
It
does matter. So somebody could brag about looking at teenage girls naked, but if it's on a show where they joke around, that makes it okay.
Where they joke around, yes. Where they joke around.
He wasn't joking.
So if you're joking around on a show, you can joke around about being a pedophile, and you think that's okay, David? Because see, that's what that is.
That was
when you want to go into a locker room where young teenage girls as young as 15 and 14. Here's the thing. Here's the thing.
Sure.
If you're going to go on a show and brag about looking at a bunch of 15 and 16-year-old girls naked, and you're defending that because it was the Howard Stern show, that is absurd, David.
And David supports that guy. You're saying you support him.
Let me explain. If these things actually did happen, presumably he would have been charged. And if he had already admitted that he did it on a TV show,
not
he
true.
would have been charged.
No one knew about it.
Nobody knew about it.
He admitted it years later, but
nobody knew.
No one knew. He went in a private dressing room.
And if any of the girls that saw him,
they did. They've done interviews. Yes, they have. They've spoken out about it. And they were afraid.
How come charged?
Because he owned the pageant, and they were afraid to do so. Just like many women that were abused by Bill Cosby didn't come forward. If you ask that about this, ask it about every other assault. There are many reasons why women, and especially in this case, young girls, don't come forward immediately. That doesn't mean it didn't happen, David.
I didn't say that. No.
Then stop saying, why didn't they come forward? Why didn't they come forward?
Was he defending Trump and the other?
Can I actually explain, or are you going to keep freaking out?
You sound. By the way, I'm not freaking out. I'm just telling it like it is, David. You're making excuses
I'm trying to have a conversation. No, I'm not making excuses. Here's my point. My point was, I think it's performative when the Democrats say they want to release it, because
it's not performative. They voted.
A vote is not performative.
That's not
they
performative.
Voted for it.
Here's why. Because it didn't go anywhere, and they knew it wouldn't go
because
anywhere.
Of the Republicans.
Because the Republicans won't vote for it. Why do you keep making excuses for people like you who voted for Donald Trump? The Republicans won't vote for it because they're afraid of Donald Trump, just like you are, to call him what he is.
He's afraid to call him what he is.
Let me explain. You keep saying
again, because under Biden and Harris's term, they were not coming out saying we need to release these files, because if they knew that if the files were released, let's say, and Trump's name was in them during the election season, Trump would have been slaughtered. He would have lost the election. Of course, the Democrats knew that.
Not true.
Okay, David, you would have to, in order for you to be correct in your assumption, you would have to know that Joe Biden read the files, that Obama read the files, that the DOJ gave him the files, and they refused to do anything. So you're making an assumption that they had all the detailed information at the time. And remember, there's hundreds of thousands of pages.
By the way,
so you're
David,
making an assumption that's not accurate.
By the way, David, no. It's not. Two wrongs don't make a right. So I'm going to prove that right now. Let's just say, for argument's sake, and I'm not saying this is true, but let's just say, argument's sake, Joe Biden knew that there were prominent left-leaning Democrats that he was defending, and that's why he didn't want to release the files. I'm not saying that's true. For argument's sake, that still doesn't make what Donald Trump is doing right. So your argument doesn't make any sense. Two wrongs wouldn't make a right.
He's doing the same thing.
And you're the guy who voted for Donald Trump, and you're the guy who continues to make excuses for him. So why don't you stop talking about the past, and why don't you start talking about the present? No. Let me explain, as you would say. Let me explain. Let me explain, as you say.
Okay.
For years, people like you said, release the files, release the files, release the files. All these people in Hollywood are in the files. But now all of a sudden, the guy who you support, well, where's the proof? Show me the evidence. It's pathetic, David. It's pathetic.
How's it pathetic? I want the files released, but I know damn well that they're never going to be released. It doesn't matter who's in office.
You don't know that damn well. You don't know that.
Yes, I do. Yes,
the victims are making a list as we speak. As we speak, they're making a list of the actual people who abuse them.
Let me ask
David a question.
Because they would be bringing themselves down.
If the victims write down a list, and one of those people on the list is Donald Trump, will you regret your vote? Yes or no?
No, because I haven't seen it, because that's not evidence. That's just
because you like a few of his policies. Right. The victims are lying. The Wall Street. Right. David, you're right. The victims are lying. The Wall Street Journal is lying. He was just joking on the Howard Stern show.
Can I ask him a question?
David, what's wrong with you? Because I don't think you're a stupid guy.
David,
what the hell is wrong with you? Why can't you just admit it?
Let me ask you a question, David. Why is the House Oversight Committee, who's run by Republicans, refusing to subpoena Alexander Acosta, who was a U.S. attorney who made the deal with Epstein? He would know best on what evidence there is. He made a deal in 2007 to allow him to go to the state prison on a really small charge, and didn't even charge him federally for trafficking young women. Why are they not bringing him in?
Well, I think it's obvious, but
is it obvious to him?
Well, David, Leonard's right.
Yeah.
David, why do you think Donald Trump's personal attorney met with Maxwell, and then a few days later,
a better question.
She was sent to Club Med? David, I'm just asking you a question. What's your opinion on that? I'd like to know your opinion. Why do you think they did that, David?
You're asking what? Why they repeat your question? I'm sorry.
Why do you think Donald Trump's personal attorney met with Maxwell? Maxwell said she never saw Donald Trump do anything, improprieties. And then days later, they put her into basically a Club Med
with no law enforcement
where she can play tennis and be outside 24 hours a day. Why do you think they did that, David? You seem like a smart guy. Why do you think they did that?
I'm assuming, based on what you're telling me, they probably wanted to give her a sweetheart deal so she wouldn't say anything. Yes.
Okay. There you go, David. Okay, we're starting in the hold on. We're starting in the right place, David. We're moving in the right direction. David, why do you think Donald Trump today, minutes after the victim spoke in D.C., again called it a Democratic hoax? Why do you think he does that, David?
Well, he calls everything a Democratic hoax. So that's, he's called
he doesn't. He doesn't call everything a Democratic.
No, when something goes wrong, it's a hoax. And when something goes right, he takes credit for it.
A Democrat hoax.
So David, let's focus on this for a moment. Why do you think he's calling the Epstein files minutes after victims were speaking out in an emotional press conference? Why did he call it a hoax? And why did he say they should stop talking about it? Why do you think he does that, David?
Probably because, as I said, his name is likely
probably. Okay, so let's rewind for a moment. David, okay, hold on.
Sure.
Let's rewind for a minute. You self-admitted that most likely the reason why, and by the way, it's not most likely, it's 100%. The reason why they spoke with Maxwell,
in your opinion.
Okay, well, if anybody can give me anything other than the contrary, any logical reason, I'm open ears.
That's
okay. You self-admit that they did this for a sweetheart deal to help exonerate Trump, according to Maxwell. You admit that. You also self-admit that most likely the reason why Donald Trump was talking. Hold on. Wait for my question.
Okay,
you self-admit this stuff, yet you claim you still support Donald Trump, even though he's most likely a pedo, most likely in the files, because you like a couple of his policies. David, how can I respect that opinion?
I don't think he's most likely a pedo. I don't think that. I think a lot of people look. From
girls
what
were
I've
14
seen
years
the files,
old by their own admission.
Yeah, but I don't think that they were all. My opinion of it is, I don't think all these people were doing exactly what Epstein himself was doing.
So let's put a little context. Let's put a little context into this, okay? Have you ever heard of a man that said the one thing he has in common with his daughter is sex, and sexualized her and talked about her body in public? Do you know anybody that does that?
Yeah, it was Trump. You're talking about.
Okay. Do you know anybody? Do you know anybody? Do any of your friends do that? Would you hang out with somebody like that?
What, that makes a joke? Is that really
no.
joke?
It's not about making a joke when you talk about your daughter's body and how voluptuous she is. And I would probably date her if she wasn't my daughter. It's not a joke when you say the one thing me and my daughter have in common when she's in her early 20s, sitting right next to her. What it proves that he's a creep and he is disgusting. And he talks about grabbing women by the genitals. He goes into teenage girls' locker rooms and brags about it. And your defense is, says, well, it was the Howard Stern show, so that's okay. He brags about sexualizing his own daughter. And it just so happens, wait a second, it just so happens that he was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein. It just so happens that for 10 years, Jeffrey Epstein's gloated about how he was best friends with Donald Trump. It just so happens that he was on the flight log 7 times. It just so happens that they gave Maxwell a sweetheart deal. You add layer to layer to layer to layer, and you can't just say, yeah, he's in the files. Even though I like a few of his policies, I probably shouldn't have voted for him. The fact that you can't say that, David, is cowardly, quite frankly.
That's not. No, it's not true at all. Can I elaborate?
Go ahead. It is, though.
Well, because again, I think that a ton of these people are in the files, and the Democrats, again, it's all performative. They don't want. They want to pretend.
It's not, David. The proof is in the. No, because what you're saying is not true.
Performative. When Trump said he was going to do something about it, that's performative.
Here's what's performative. When you had a bunch of right-wing clowns with binders in their hands, phase 1.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. It's not performative when every single Democrat, whether it happened today or yesterday or a year ago, it happened this year. Every single Democrat voted to release the Epstein files. Right. And Republicans are the ones that are blocking it right now. That is not performative, Dave. That's not performative.
When Pam Bondi said the list is on my desk, I'm getting ready to read it and then release it. Yeah. When the Attorney General says, I have the report, I have the list, and then the next day he's talking about, there's actually not a list. That's performative.
Dave, so you don't like performative stuff, right? You don't like performative stuff?
Correct, of course.
Okay.
They couldn't have released it because a ton of their names would have been in it. That's why
David doesn't like
nobody.
David doesn't like performative stuff. David, what do you think about a guy who wakes up and puts on 8 layers of orange makeup every day? What do you think about a guy during the Republican National Convention having Hulk Hogan speak, a known racist, or Dana White, who runs the UFC, who is a wife beater, speak at the convention, or Kid Rock, who is also a homophobe? Would you call that? You seem to not like performative stuff because you just said you have a problem with performative, and yet you vote for Donald Trump, the guy who looks like a clown every day, who puts on makeup. Don't tell me you don't like performative.
Talked about water pressure and sharks and getting electrocuted. That was all performative.
Because I don't like performative things that happen, I'm now going to not like Trump because he's orange.
The vote is factual. Not to interrupt you, but the vote is factual. They have a resolution in front of the House right now that every Democrat has voted for. That's not performative. That's a fact.
Yeah, well,
that's
Leonard,
an actual fact that you can look at.
Because
the Republicans are not voting for the resolution.
They know it won't pass.
Because
first of all, you have Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Massey, and some Republicans that they have tried to convince, and some of them it has worked. They didn't know that it wouldn't pass because there are always Republicans out there that can change their mind, and there are some Republicans that have. So your premise that you knew for a fact that it wasn't going to pass is not true. They have been pleading with.
No, that's not true.
Okay, well, you could listen. If you think you want to go into every single mind of every single Democrat why they voted to release the Epstein files and make an excuse.
Basic logic to understand. I mean, look, again, I'm not trying to just make it about Biden and Kamala, but when Kamala was running, obviously she's not in the files, right? But why didn't she consistently push and say we need to release?
Because she was the vice president. She was the vice president. Because she's the vice president.
She did better than that.
Because
she told us that he was going to ruin the country.
I'm going to give you a little history lesson here, Dave. Okay, because she's the vice president and she doesn't have the authority to do so. She's not a policymaker. You don't know what you're talking about.
But when she was running for office, she could have said, "I want these files released. We need to press for them."
So you're angry at Kamala Harris because when she was running for office, she didn't bring up the Epstein files, but yet the man who you voted for, who's the president of the United States now, and the leader. No, you're missing the point. The leader of the free world. You want to talk about Kamala Harris, who at one time was the vice president, but yet you don't want to talk about Donald Trump, the guy who you voted for, and you don't want to admit the fact that you voted for a pedo, and you voted for a guy who's an adjudicated abuser. You voted for him knowing all those things. You knew that he was an adjudicated abuser.
The evidence for those, I mean, I see you
don't have all the evidence because you weren't a juror. You were not a juror. You didn't see all the evidence.
You know, I notice how you never want to say that was in a criminal court because it didn't happen in a criminal court. So first of all,
out of a criminal court. So first of all, just because somebody is adjudicated and found liable doesn't mean they didn't do it and didn't commit a crime. That's number one. Number two,
there's no significant evidence he raped that woman.
So first of all, you don't know what all the evidence is because you weren't on the jury. You don't know. We don't have all the evidence. The jury did, and they found him liable for abuse.
For $86
I would
million.
also say that you're also assuming that the 30 plus women that have come forward that have accused him of abuse are lying. They're not telling the truth,
Well,
including his ex-wife, in court documents who testified under oath that her husband abused her. So you think his ex-wife, hold on. According to David, because David is a very logical guy, E. Jean Carroll's lying. Donald Trump's ex-wife is lying. The 25 other women that have accused him of it are all lying.
The
and the
10
guy,
women,
and the guy, no, that's what you're saying. Make no mistake about it. That's what you're saying. I'm showing you the evidence. Okay, no, I'm putting words in your mouth. I'm putting words in your mouth, and perhaps you should take a body part of Donald Trump.
He lost the lawsuit.
Perhaps you should put a body part of Donald Trump out of your mouth, David. What do you think about that? Because that's what you do every single time you call into the show. Get the hell out of here. You wear the Donald Trump knee pads 24/7. You make excuses for Donald Trump 24/7. You don't believe any of the victims. You play stupid. Oh, I didn't hear that. Oh, Donald Trump admitted to that. Donald Trump could admit to the worst crimes in the world, and your defense would be, well, it's the Howard Stern show, so who cares? Your excuses are pathetic, quite frankly, David, and you are pathetic. You call into this show and you make excuses. You want to talk about Kamala Harris because she didn't talk about the Epstein files on the campaign trail, but you don't want to talk about all the evidence that shows that Donald Trump is in there and he does not want people like you to see the truth. And you're the type of person where even if he was in there and the truth was all exposed, you would still support him because you like his immigration policy. Have a nice day, David.